Hi everyone, welcome back. So for the next video in this devlog series, I thought it might make sense and be a bit fun to take a look back at kind of how my game has arrived at where it's at now. Fortunately, along the way, I've saved quite a few builds and videos we can take a look at. And so today, let's take a trip down memory lane. So my project really began quite basic. At the start, I was really just trying to write some of my own code, and I decided I was going to write my own classes for a vector. And then I decided I should add some physics on top of that and some math. And then eventually I kind of got to the point where I decided it would be cool to write some code for collision detection and resolution. And then at that point, I needed to have some graphics to be able to see what was happening. So I started using SDL. This is still written in C++ to draw on the screen. At this point, though, I was really not thinking about making a game. It was more so just this was a project I enjoyed working on. I was working full-time in the software industry, and I was kind of frustrated with my current job. Just lots of code that I didn't understand going on at the job, and kind of not well-written code. And so I really wanted to have a project that was kind of mine and that everything was simple and I could understand what was happening. So it was pretty humble beginnings here for where we're going to end up. It was around this time that I first started kind of coming up with the idea of the convenience store game. I've got a picture here of a rough sketch I drew at the time of kind of how I wanted to lay out the store, and it's pretty cool because it ended up being pretty well the same layout as you see in the 3D game. All of that kind of led to this next build, where you can see I've taken those simple shapes and I've started trying to prototype this idea of a convenience store. There was a lot of work I did in this to build up to that. That previous example was really, really simple. There was not very much going on. Now there's enemies spawning. There's the idea of enemies. There's a health bar. I've incorporated all of the bounding boxes onto these aisles. You have mouse inputs. There's reloading, health on the enemies. There's this little turret in the top right corner there that's firing at the enemies. But this was kind of the first attempt to realize what I had there. So as part of building up that prototype, I started to realize kind of all of the code I needed, everything that was kind of missing, and I started trying to really develop it into a game engine. So I switched over to DirectX. At this point, I was now running on Windows. Prior to that, I was running on a MacBook. I started adding a lot more kind of general code. So I would have game objects and I would have a dynamic list of them. I had Lua files I could take input in from. I started kind of having this idea of sprites that I could draw any number of. And so I kind of wanted to be able to build a game from all of this. And so this was kind of the idea of my first shipping game with my engine, the H engine. And the idea is just this giraffe, you kind of move its head up and down. I programmed this Hooke's Law code in so you could move the head up and down, it would stretch, and then if it came in contact, it would kind of elastic back. And if you hit spacebar when the two giraffes are headbutting, you get audio and you get points, and if the bird hits you, you lose points. There was file IO for the high scores as well. The leading high score there by a long shot. So I was really getting excited working on all of this, and I really wanted to kind of start building up. So you can see here I added in a little bit of a basic kind of UI editor here on top. You'll see this one I added in, it was a bunch of work, and then it's going to be quite a while before I put it back in, just because I was kind of maintaining all of this, and I was serializing and deserializing all my game objects, and I was kind of adding code too rapidly to maintain all of that. So I had this level editor. I also started trying writing some shaders so I could run those on top, you can see here. Overall, I was really happy with the progress, and all the features I was implementing I was really excited about. And so I kind of used this as a test to test out the new engine. And then moving forward, I kind of started working on this, bringing all this and some more into the convenience store idea. So on the surface, this looks a lot like the first prototype. Obviously, I've added in the picture, my just rough drawing in the background, but a lot is going on here. I have some different guns you can use. There's now a lot of AI going on, so I've written a whole A-star pathfinding system for this AI. I had to add some dots on for the enemies so you could see which way they were looking. I've got these blood stains when they die. There's an XP system, and there's a concept of upgrades. When I clear this wave, there'll be some upgrades you can choose from. It's not in this video, but I also tried prototyping like a magic system. I like the idea of kind of using the convenience store stuff for abilities. As I kill this last guy, you'll see there's this janitor. I thought that would be fun to have a janitor come around and clean up all the blood in between. And then you can pick what upgrade you'd like. This whole time period, these last two builds, was really fun and really exciting for me just as a programmer, just kind of encountering new things that I'd like to implement and kind of getting to work on it. But it was really towards the end of kind of this build that I started to realize, like, if I wanted to start to turn this into a game, not just a game engine, I'd have to start thinking about art, and really I was kind of losing momentum just in that I was running out of those fun, easy things to work on. And so I thought a lot about artwork. I tried to do things in 2D, and ultimately kind of came to the decision that I should switch to 3D. At this point now, I've switched over to OpenGL. I really cared a lot about the cross-platform nature of it. I didn't like that with DirectX I could only run it on Windows. I wanted to be able to put my game out anywhere. So I did a ton of work to push everything over. I was following a lot of OpenGL tutorials at this point. You can see the shadow maps happening here. But I also didn't really have the art skills to match this. So everything right now has this kind of not very good texture on it, this test texture. And you can see there's kind of the start of a store, but it's still pretty rough. This was kind of getting what I had in 2D now working in 3D, and then also adding in the ability to interact with the shelf. So at this point I was pretty pleased to be working in 3D, but I was also starting to realize how much artwork was needed and how much time that was going to take. So our next build here, you can see I've got some better textures. I've got kind of the slushy machines in that ATM, but the really big thing was first I had modeled my first enemy here, which you can see them kind of doing this up and down. But the really big thing for me was I had skeletal animations now working. Which just took forever to figure out. It took me a long time, and I was kind of following some guides for DirectX, which if you've written DirectX shader code, you know the multiplication order is actually the opposite. So ultimately I ended up solving this one bug by flipping my multiplication order, and I was so excited to have this guy doing this curtsy. Moving on from this build, it's really not as much of those kind of massive changes. There was a ton of stuff behind the scenes I had to do to get everything working. Really kind of building up to a 3D game engine was a ton of work, and I really was unprepared for it, as well as kind of learning how to model well enough and using Photoshop to make textures. It really ended up being a ton of work. At this point now, a fair amount of time has passed since the last build, and I really had to figure out a lot of stuff. My goal with this build was I wanted to kind of implement that first gun assembly. And so I had to make a lot of models. I think I've made most of the fridge models at this point. I made all the models for that first weapon. And then in terms of the engine, there's a huge difference. It's multi-threaded now. I had to write a lot of code to handle all of the textures that are coming in. I have some optimizations for the fact that the camera remains static at the top here, so it avoids redrawing models that aren't going to move. There's particles coming off of the rollers. There's bloom effects going on. This was really kind of a big build up to this. And this is kind of when I showed that last clip in the previous video of our assembly. This was building up to that. So this was kind of, I had been kind of drowning a little bit in the project, and I decided I should set a deadline of making a build that had combat and assembling the first gun. I'm going to skip on the combat in this video. You're probably safe to guess that demon monster I showed you, getting the skeletal animations working, is one of the enemies you fight, one of the monsters. But next video when we talk about combat, I'll kind of show a little bit of where we've come from here. So there's a couple mechanics I also implemented at this point behind the scenes that I'm not showing. I'm going to show it in a later vlog. But this is kind of really the last major release until now. It's been about 2 years, and I spent most of that time on art assets, so doing all the inventory in the store, making all of the enemy models, and really that was a big time sink. And finally, we arrive at where the game is currently at. Lots and lots of improvements here. So the particles I've improved. There's first from culling. I implemented a full PBR rendering setup. With this build, at this point, I switched over to a shader that's more of a toon shader. So I think I don't really use materials much, just mostly normal maps and emissive maps. There's a forward render setup with our transparent glass. Dynamic lighting, so there's screen space shadows, and I can add and remove lights on the fly. Obviously, I filled up all the art assets in the store, which was a huge task. I made all of the enemies that are going to be in the game, all of the weapons, the main character. And not displayed here, I also set up the editor. I used ImGUI library. Our next video, I'm going to kind of go through some of the things I have set up there, which is pretty cool. And that's going to be it. I'm currently at with the game, and hopefully the last kind of foundation for where I'm going to finish the game. At this point now, I'm hoping I'm not going to be doing too much more engine writing or art asset making, and I'm just going to be switched over to writing and filling out the content and gameplay of the game. Hopefully you all enjoyed this look back at how my project has progressed. I gotta be honest, it's pretty crazy that much time has passed since that first video. I thought for sure I'd be able to knock out a game engine in a game in under a year, no problem. But here we are. So that's going to do it for us today, I guess. Tune in for the next video. We're going to take a look at the combat in my game currently and some of the monsters. And we'll see if by some miracle I've managed to make some progress. Thanks for watching, and bye.